So back in 2024, the Philippines did something on the global market that really turned some heads. It started selling off a ton of its national gold reserves. Why would they do that? Well, today we're going to dig into a column that argues this wasn't just some dry financial decision, but maybe a key piece of a much bigger political puzzle.
All right, let's kick things off with a pretty wild fact. In the first half of 2024, one single country shot to the top of the charts as the world's biggest seller of gold from its official reserves. And we're not talking about a minor adjustment here. This was a massive, headline-grabbing move.
And here's what makes it so bizarre. This was happening while pretty much every other central bank on the planet was doing the complete opposite. They were buying gold, stocking up, to add some stability to their reserves, and maybe rely a little less on the US dollar. So for one country to suddenly start selling, that's swimming against a very strong current. So, of course, this brings us to the billion-dollar question, or I guess the 25-ton of gold question. Why? Why would the Philippines Central Bank make such a bold move, going against the grain at this exact moment? To get to the bottom of the controversy, let's break down the chain of events that the source lays out for us. Okay, first things first, let's really wrap our heads around the sheer scale and the timing of this decision by the Bangko Sentral of Pilipinas, that's the BSP. We need to understand why this move raised so many eyebrows in the first place. I mean, just look at that number. Almost 25 metric tons of gold. The source is clear. This wasn't just trimming the hedges or rebalancing a portfolio in a minor way. This was a massive disposal of a core national asset, a huge decision. And this slide really gets to the heart of why it was so weird. On one side, you have the rest of the world saying, gold is a safe bet, let's buy it. And on the other, you have the Philippines cashing out its chips. And get this, right as gold prices were starting to take off on a major bull run, the timing just seemed off. So they sold all that gold. What happened next? Well, as you can probably imagine, it resulted in a massive, record-breaking payday for the central bank. Right, so selling off all that gold, which they had bought for way cheaper years ago, plus some other income, it caused the BSP's profits to just explode. We're talking surging past 100 billion pesos, which was a new record for them. An institution that was usually just a modest performer suddenly hit the jackpot. But here's the kicker. What happens to all that record profit? It doesn't just sit in a vault at the central bank. There's this crucial law on the books that basically acts like an automatic pipeline, diverting a huge chunk of those earnings, at least half, directly to the national government. Let's just trace the money here, step by step. It's actually pretty simple. The BSP sells the gold, makes a historic profit. Then, boom, the law kicks in and says at least half of that goes straight to the national treasury. Suddenly, the treasury has this huge surplus it wasn't expecting, which can then be used to pay for government projects. It's a straight line from a gold bar to a government budget. And this is where the source we're looking at argues the story shifts from a simple financial transaction into a full-blown political controversy. The author starts connecting the dots, pointing to what he calls a convergence of patterns that he finds, let's say, very suspicious. The key here isn't just one of these things, it's all three of them together. First, the timing. The sale happened right as the government was ramping up spending on projects that are now facing corruption allegations. Second, the legal setup. The profits automatically flow into the exact fund used for these kinds of projects. And third, it's all really hard to track because the gold money isn't listed separately. So here's how the mechanism supposedly worked. To fund these unprogrammed allocations, think of them as projects that get added to the budget later, the government needs some kind of surprise revenue to appear. Well, what do you know? This sudden, massive dividend from the BSP, fueled by the gold sale, fit the bill perfectly. So you can see the trail of breadcrumbs the author is laying out, and based on what he calls strong circumstantial grounds, he ends up posing a very, very serious question about the central bank's actual role in all of this. And there it is, the central allegation of the column. It's framed as a political question, not a criminal one. Was the central bank, whether it meant to or not, basically used as a tool, as a funding mechanism, to generate cash for a huge infrastructure program that's now drowning in scandal? The author's argument is that once the BSP knows that its decisions are directly funding a controversial government budget, its role gets murky. It can't just claim to be a neutral, technical manager of assets anymore. He argues that the line between being an independent manager and a silent enabler starts to get really, really blurry. Now, to be fair, the columnist did reach out to the BSP to get their side of the story on these allegations, and he did include their official response in his piece. And you can see just how far apart these two positions are. On one hand, you have the author asking if the BSP was basically used to fund a spending spree. On the other, you have the BSP's flat-out denial, calling the whole idea baseless and explaining it was just part of a long-term strategy that started way back in 2020. The BSP's whole defense really rests on its independence. They're saying, look, we are separate from politics. We fiercely protect that independence. This was about smart, long-term management of our assets, not some short-term scheme to generate cash for the government. But despite that strong denial, the author doesn't just let it go. He ends by basically saying, okay, if it's all above board, then prove it. He calls for more transparency. Show us the audited numbers, a clear breakdown of the income, and a map showing exactly where every single peso of that dividend money went. If they refuse, he says, it's only going to make people more suspicious. And that really leaves us with the core tension of this whole thing. What's the real role of a central bank when its financial moves can have such massive direct political consequences? Can it truly be a purely apolitical manager floating above the political fray? Or does it, at some point, become a part of the system, even an unwilling one? The source argues that, at the very least, we have to ask the question.